We are
Can
live.
you? Okay.
Good evening, friends. I, Moumita Pal, welcome you to the Stories of Beliefs and Social Customs under TMYS Review June 2022 in collaboration with Global South Colloquium, University of Victoria. We are calling for submissions of essays, poems, and short stories under the project. To know more about the submission guidelines and the project architecture, please visit www.tellmeyourstory.biz. This evening, I consider myself very privileged to be in the company of our esteemed panelists, Patralekha Chatterjee and Dr. Samita Sen, to share their valuable insights. The topic for today's discussion is gender based superstition. Both of them are experts in this area with many years of professional experience. So, before we open the forum for discussion, I would like to take the opportunity to introduce our speakers. Our first panelist tonight is Patralekha Chatterjee. She is an award-winning journalist, columnist, author, public speaker, and consultant to international agencies focusing on development issues across multiple platforms. As a writer, she has brought to the national and international consciousness the crucial importance of transdisciplinary factors in the provision of public healthcare and social determinants that impact health and development outcomes with a focus on women, children, and marginalized groups. Besides writing for the international media, she contributes a fortnightly column on politics, public policy, and development issues in India and other emerging economies to the Asian Age and Deccan Chronicle to multi-edition English language newspapers with a combined circulation of 1.4 million. She writes another fortnightly column on development issues in Amar Ujala, a multi-edition Hindi daily, and commentaries for Deccan Herald. She has won several awards and fellowships both nationally and internationally. We welcome you, ma'am. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Momita.
Our second panelist today is Dr. Samita Sen. She received her PhD from Cambridge University in 1992 and was chair at Trinity College. She taught at Calcutta University and Jodhpur University from 1994 to 2018. She served as the first Vice Chancellor, Diamond Harbour Women's University from 2013 to 2015. She was also the Dean Faculty of Interdisciplinary Studies, Jodhpur University from 2016 to 2018. Her monograph, Women and Labour in Late Colonial India, Cambridge University Press, 1999, won the Trevor Rees Prize in Commonwealth History. She has been active in the women's movement in India and internationally. She participated in both the governmental and non-governmental fora of the Beijing Conference 1995. We welcome you, ma'am. Thank you for joining.
Thank you. My pleasure.
So, so, without further ado, let's begin the session. First, I would like to call upon Patralekha Chatterjee to share her views on today's topic. Over to you, ma'am.
Okay. So thank you, and it's great to be part of this August panel. And welcome and good evening, good morning, good afternoon to our viewers wherever you are. I am speaking from Delhi. I'm a journalist, and the topic I'm going to talk about is gender bias and superstition. Can you see this title slide, Momita?
Yes.
Momita? Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Now we know, this is a topic we all know about, superstition. India, especially, we have a multi ethnic identity. And as we say, it's a nation of many, many superstitions. Now, when we talk about superstitions, there are two types, right? They can be relatively harmless or extremely harmful. So the harmless superstitions, for instance, we all know, like hanging lemon and seven green chilies. Many Indians believe that Alakshmi, the goddess of misfortune, can bring bad luck. That she likes pungent food, and you can see many shop owners across the country, hanging lemon and 7 green chilies at their door, hoping that the goddess will be happy to find her favorite food and leave without entering the shop. But not all superstitions are harmless or innocuous. Now, one of the things, when we talk about superstitions, typically, at least in the popular discourse, superstitions have been framed in the context of religion. But the ground reality, and I'm talking mostly about India, South Asian context, the ground reality is a lot more complex. Superstitions also affect health and well being. And typically, those whom it hits hardest are those without power and the voice in society. They are the ones who are targeted, typically in patriarchal societies such as ours. The victims are women, and superstition affects them through their entire life cycle. I'll start with, just very basics. I write actually on health and development issues. So I'll talk a little bit about how superstition, plays, it's not just a cultural issue, but also how it affects people, right, as I mentioned, right through their life cycle, even their health and general state of well-being. Beliefs, diet, and childhood illnesses. There's a paper, actually, all the references are given right at the end, but it was by Asha Benakappa and Pujita Shivamurthy. They say that one's belief in food is strongly dictated by his or her upbringing, superstition, and religion. And there was a study they did to determine the beliefs, knowledge, and attitude of caregivers towards diet practices during childhood illnesses. Problems is, there's all this whole range of superstition about you can't eat this and you can't eat that. Now, in traditional, in households, which is a very, very large, I mean, majority, I would say, in India, in villages, and not just in villages, even in cities, these dietary taboos, they start, affecting, let's say, pregnant women, new mothers, even children. Many caregivers follow faulty dietary practices during illnesses. This is I'm actually just taking out a few lines from this study. The beliefs, diet, and childhood illnesses. So, for instance, one of the things the authors say is that we found that elders at home were the main source of dietary beliefs for the mothers. So, it is one thing that, let's say, okay, you have the health system, you have, health messaging, official messaging, but what very often what the mothers they do is listen to the other elderly women in the house. And for instance, I've just picked out a few. Again, this is from this same study. Eating sprouted seed leads to cold. Sugar causes cough in infants. Milk causes vomiting. Some believe it increases sputum during cold. Jamun decreases diarrhea. Holy water cures measles. Milk and sugar produces worms in the gut. Biscuits increase sputum during illness. Rice causes fever during illnesses. This is among the Muslims. Undiluted milk forms clots and blocks the gut. Now, these are kind of entrenched beliefs, and there's no real scientific justification to many of these beliefs. But so, this is the thing that culture, where superstitions and culture, intersect. And the women, by and large, they do not, a very large number of women, of I would say the majority, even today in India, and it's not just in rural India, but I've met enough, middle class people, even in cities like Delhi, where I live, they believe in this. So even when they are sick, or even when they are, let's say, becoming weak, they will follow some of these. And these are, it's all linked to superstition, and this affects their health. This is, as I said, it affects the entire life cycle. And I'm just starting with, let's say, childhood. This is also, goes on to small children, right? Then let's get a few years later. Menstruation taboos. Now we all know there are dozens and dozens of taboos surrounding menstruation, which again have their roots in superstition. And the point about these superstitious beliefs is that they're exclusionary. They exclude women and girls from many aspects of social and cultural life. And I feel that when we're talking about superstition, this is one of the primary, at least to me, this is one of the primary things to remember, that it is not just cultural. It targets the vulnerable, it targets the weak disproportionately. We know about it's not just about menstruating women not being allowed to go to temples. I think that's a terrible thing, but it's not, doesn't stop there. Now, you must have heard of the menstrual hut. There's a lot of literature about menstrual huts in Nepal, but this is also very much true in India. The so-called menstrual hut is often an outhouse or a cowshed left in extremely unhygienic conditions, and the women and the girl or the young girl or the woman is made to spend about 4 or 5 days over there, which seriously affects the dermatological and reproductive health of women. This is again, so the debilitating practice of confining women to menstrual huts, in which menstruating women, even teenage girls, are kept away from their household for the first few days of their period because they're considered impure. This is again going to superstition and beliefs, which are again societal. But once again, who are these beliefs targeting the most? Who are they hitting the most? It is women. So this is linked in my mind to patriarchy and the low status of women, especially those who don't have agency, and who cannot, who don't have a voice. So this is persisting in this Uttarakhand hills. I'm sure many other places, even after being highlighted many times, and the receiving. And this I've given a link to the story. This was as recent as November 27, 2020, in Times of India, right? Then we come to another kind of, and a very serious superstition, which is linked to witch hunting, which actually usually affects adult women, much older. More than 2,500 Indians have been chased, tortured, and killed in witch hunts between 2000 and 2016, according to India's National Crime Records Bureau. And these, remember, are just the official statistics. The actual number would be much more. Again, it's linked to superstition. Witch hunts primarily target women and exploit India's caste system and cultural patriarchy. That's why most of the victims are women. Now, several Indian states have recognized the need for special anti-witch hunt laws since 1999, and yet only a few have enacted them, and the ones that have enacted them are the implementation is very poor. And in this connection, I think one should talk about Narendra Dabholkar, who was actually killed. He fought against witch hunting and superstition, and he was actually killed by right-wing extremists 2013. And it's only after his death, if I remember correctly, Maharashtra brought in a law against witch hunting. Now, several states, as I said, have recognized the need for anti-witch hunt laws since 1999, but the implementation, as in everything else in India and in our part of the world, the implementation is very poor. So the problem continues. Now, superstition and witch hunting is an interesting case because, as I say, it's easy to see it just as a religious issue or a cultural issue, but there's much, much more to this. I see the religiosity, the cultural aspect is just another layer in this. The actual reasons are, much more, it's economic, it's commercial as well. Now, the vulnerable groups labeled as witches are often elderly and single women living alone in their property, childless women, widows, divorcees, and physically challenged women. Right now, you see who do these so-called socio-cultural or religious beliefs, who are they affecting the most? It's women and vulnerable women. So it is leveraged to actually for economic reasons quite often. In an interview to Deutsche Welle, well-known lawyer Indira Jaising, said that while superstition is often made out to be the main reason behind the killings, and many of the people who are branded as witches are actually killed in very brutal ways, the crimes are often related to class and gender discrimination. So superstition and witch hunting is also a part of the larger story of violence against women and discrimination against women, and used as a means to exact revenge. The members of upper caste society try to stigmatize the poor and indigenous people by branding them as witches. Indeed, land grabs, I mean, it's been pointed out in many, many reports and stories and scholarly work, land grabs, health, and witches are actually interconnected. Superstition and witch hunting. Women's rights activists in Jharkhand, which is, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's one of the states with the largest maximum number of reported witch hunt cases, have pointed out that because of inadequate punishment, the land mafia continues to exploit tribal women. Now, Jharkhand, as we know, has a significant tribal population. Non-implementation remains a standard problem across all states in India. This happens. Now, the interesting thing is, if you're a city person, or if you're not really that aware of the realities, it's very easy and probably tempting to kind of simplify or reduce this narrative as, this happens to poor people only, and this happens to people in who are not very developed. But that is not true. As I said, that it's not always, it is superstitious beliefs is leverage for other gains, and it's not necessarily happening to the poorest. In fact, in Jharkhand's case, women's rights activists are pointing out that this is happening also in the better off villages, which have seen what we call development. There's a story I was just reading, Women, Superstition and Murder Collide in India, by Seema Yasmin in the Scientific American in 2018. And this is a paragraph which I'm just sharing with you, that accusations of sorcery are used to oust women from valuable land that men covet in a region where flawed development plans have produced agricultural failures. They say sociologists who study violence in India. Okay, this is the story which actually, this is linked to my earlier slide about, what to Jharkhand and the better off villages. So in the eyes of Kochbong village residents in Jharkhand's Ranchi, a woman in her early 30s is the reason behind every road accident that occurs on the ring road near Namkun block in the district. Savitri Munda was branded a Dayan, witch, a few years ago by the village residents, and her entire family was accused of practicing witchcraft. Now, Savitri lives in the constant fear of being attacked by the villagers every time an unfortunate event occurs in her village. Now, this is the interesting thing. Where does she live? Economically and infrastructurally, Kochbong is one of the better off villages in this constituency. So if you go by the standard development markers, situated next to National Highway 43, merely 20 kilometers away from Jharkhand's capital, Ranchi, it has access to Pakka roads, that is, tarred roads, not village roads. There are toilets in every home, which is, which at that time, this is 2019, was not the case across India. And the village even has a school. Now, Jharkhand is one of the backward states, one of the poorer states. So by the standards of Jharkhand or even rural India, these are, markers of development. But superstition is its bane, not just Savitri. Two other women in the village of approximately 250 households have been declared witches. All three are haunted every day by the fear of a painful death. Savitri is convinced that this campaign to brand her a witch is a ploy by her relatives to grab her 13 acres of land. Now you see how this is intersecting these two narratives. The narrative, of superstition, which is a kind of religio-cultural, social narrative, and the very, very hard narrative of economics and commerce and property, So it is used to deprive women who otherwise don't have a voice or vulnerable, who are at the bottom, to and this story is actually appeared in a website called The First Post, and I put the link, and you can check it out. But we've had this problem, the superstition and witch branding, for very many years. And it's to sort of wind up on a slightly more positive note, it's not that nothing is happening and people are just accepting this. There are signs of people fighting back, and I'll cite some examples. Sejal Dand is a director of a NGO called Anandi. It's actually Anandi is a acronym. It stands for Area Networking and Development Initiatives. It's a Gujarat based NGO working for gender justice, called witch hunting just another form of violence against women. You know, and in 2015, this is coming up more and more in the discourse. In a Government of India status report on women described it as an outright discriminatory practice and a way to control women who do not conform to gender norms. And I would also see all the other superstitions which I spoke about, diet or the menstrual taboos, is essentially part of the larger canvas of controlling women, controlling her body, trying to body her sexuality. Such gender non-conforming women, branded as Churel, Dayan, Tohoni, these are some of the terms used in different parts of India, are being castigated for anything and everything. It could be disease, it could be death, it could be a natural disaster, natural or man-made, even children's disease. So they would say, oh, it's because so and so is a witch, that's why, right? Witch branding is used as a tool to discredit not just women, but to settle old scores between families, and the accusation is added as an afterthought. Yet the impact of this on women is devastating and needs to be curbed. Then Anandi, going back to Anandi's work, and as I said, the attempt to fight back, to resist, to have a counter narrative, is on the issue of witch branding, has been through the following phases: getting women to speak up about the women phenomenon of witch branding in their own women's groups. As I said, it is also the narrative is also about vulnerability. And who is most vulnerable? The person who doesn't have a voice, or the person who thinks that speaking up would have devastating consequences and there's nobody to support. So the first step is to get women who are who are being branded as witches to speak up about the phenomenon of witch branding in their own women's groups, recognizing the pattern by which women are targeted as witches. As I mentioned, as I pointed out, and there are a lot of reports on this, land grab, property, there is a common narratives over there, right? Understanding and highlighting the violence element as against the superstition element, and building the confidence of Anandi set up these along with other women's groups, set up these what they call Nyaya Samiti, which is to deal with cases of witch branding. Nyaya Samitis are justice committees, are women's collectives which seek to define the strategy and undertake action on cases of violence against women. I mean, basically to tell these women that you're not alone, you have somebody. So I think this is the first step. Then registering the cases with the police. And I can tell you, as a journalist, as somebody who started out more than 30 years ago as a crime reporter, and it's not just women who are branded witches, it is extremely difficult in many parts of India for a woman to just go and register a case, alone. I've seen this, any number of such instances with women, let's say, who faced, dowry, violence because of dowry harassment and many other things. But there is strength in a collective. So, when a group of women go, it becomes a different issue, right? Working with the police to deal sensitively with the cases and ensuring that they record the incidents whenever they occurred. Now, this is a report which, again, you can, if you're interested in the topic, you can, it's on the web. Witch branding and police report, a case study from Anandi, Gujarat. Okay, so here, this is the end of my talk, and I'm very happy to take questions later on. There are all the references which I've given, and this will tell you more. So that to conclude, essentially, I see superstition and belief as part of the larger canvas, larger narrative of violence and discrimination against women, and it's also a marker and reflective of the low status of women and the vulnerable position. And superstitious beliefs, it is a bias because it is targets women disproportionately. As you discovered that most of the witches are women. As far as I know, most of them are women. And this is not just in India, in other parts, and is often used to actually grab her property, whatever, she's a single woman or a widow or a thing. So these are the references, and So thank you so much. And, this has really been a pleasure and an honor to be part of this discussion.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for your beautiful presentation. It was really informative and insightful, and it's really disheartening that even in 21st century, women have to face so many hardships due to this kind of baseless superstitions. Thank you very much. So now I would like to move on to Professor Dr. Samita Sen. Ma'am, over to you. Please share your insights.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Great pleasure to be here and to be with Patralekha Chatterjee at this panel. And thank you, Moumita, for organizing this and giving us some frameworks to address. One of the issues you had given us in the framework you gave me was menstruation. Since Patralekha has already spoken about menstruation, that gives me background from which to start my submission to you today. Now, I would say Patralekha has spoken about witch hunt in some detail. I would also add widowhood to that complex of problems that she delineated. A lot of witch hunting
Yeah.
is in relation to widowhood, and widowhood, apart from witch hunting, is also one of a major kind of a stage in women's life, which is hedged with superstition, which is makes her more vulnerable, as Patralekha argued, that the more vulnerable are also targets of superstitious beliefs. And widowhood beautifully demonstrates that concatenation of situations. And as we know, traditionally, widowhood was highly coded, highly surveyed, policed in terms of a number of beliefs about food, dress, what you could attend, what you couldn't attend, exclusionary practices. But if we set apart, there is no doubt that both witch hunt, both the calling out of women as witches and widowhood are both related to questions of sexuality. You'll have to forgive me, I have a very bad voice today. Um, um, so both of these are related to questions of sexuality. But the other cluster of superstitions, which I've been asked to speak about today, is menstruation and pregnancy. Not only pregnancy, I would say even more than pregnancy, childbirth. So this second cluster of issues which have invited to, which are sort of are a focus of social superstitions, are what is special about them? Why is it these particular things that attract such superstitious belief? I won't detail these things because some of these issues have already been discussed by Patralekha, and the childbirth superstitions are extremely well known. I don't need to tell stories about that. Um, so it's obvious that these are related to questions of reproduction. And reproduction, of course, has been in, I would say, three registers, the focus of superstition. One is of it delineates the difference between men and women. So menstruation, childbirth are issues that are visible ways in which women are set apart from men. And it is this obvious, visible difference which men deal with uh, by uh, uh, delineating superstitions and taboos around them. Also, in Brahminical patriarchy, particularly, this is also the source of women's power. And there is the fear of the unknown. For men, in particular, these are worlds that they cannot participate in or penetrate. And therefore, these three kind of factors in various combinations come together to make these arenas of women's lives particularly bound by, particularly attended by superstition. So I would say that is the reason. The next question is what is the impact of having a lot of superstitions around these issues? Um, for menstruation, I would say the menstrual heart, the isolation during menstruation, the fact that women were not allowed to participate in some community, family activities at that time, were perhaps in those days to do partly at least with their inability to manage it, to control it, to not control it, but to mitigate it. Um, and this, and we saw this very beautifully portrayed in the film Chokher Bali, where Binodini gets up after she is um, sitting around with some women, and it is clear that she has started her periods. In the way women dressed, in the um, um, what was available to them in terms of how to handle these things, there was perhaps not as much as we see now. So, in those terms, um, the measures taken by society to manage these were in relation to a society which was organized around household activities. So this was a pre-industrial society in which the household was the locus focus of a wide range of activities. And in the South Asian context, it was also societies which were dominated by gender segregation of some sort or the other. And these two factors would have shaped how women responded to something like menstruation. Um, the problem happened when slowly capitalist modernity began to change the way people lived. And household was no longer the locus or the focus of people's everyday activities. There was a much larger need to um, be in the public, go into the public. And many kinds of public domains were delineated. So, schools for young girls, you had to go out on the street to go to school. So, education for older women, employment, for poor women, laboring compulsions, agricultural requirement for agricultural work, all kinds of work required you to go out of the house, which totally changed the context of how you will deal with issues like menstruation. So I would say that the story of menstruation is also a story of technology. We don't think of this as technology, but actually it is technologies of how we handle menstruation, changing technologies that has made a huge difference in how women experience menstruation on a day-to-day basis. Um, and I would say two things along with that. First, that the changing technology has not changed the overwhelming perceptions of taboo around menstruation. And I have a very favorite story that I tell about this, which is when I was a student in Cambridge. I used to have my own toilet, and I often forgot or didn't really bother. My box of tampons would often be outside, not in the cupboard. And I had a particular friend, woman friend, who, when she came to visit me and she would go to the toilet, if she found the tampon outside, she would put it in the shelf. And again, I would take it out when I needed to use it, and then I would forget to put it back. And this happened many times. We never spoke about it. She would put it in, I would take it out and forget to put it back in. Now, the context is, of course, that the toilet was used also by men, friends who came to visit. And it offended her that the tampon was visible uh, to men who happened to come into the toilet. My position on this was that this is my toilet. Um, I don't see the problem if people see that I own and use tampons, and even if they're men. But even very educated, um, otherwise, you would not think people who suffered from these perceptions of taboo did, in fact, consider it so that the perception of taboo was so strong that it applied to other people. So she was offended by my it happening in my toilet. Um, and these taboos have not died easily. And I would also say that it surprises me that despite, so much development in the field of medicine and health and, pharmaceuticals, it is amazing uh, how little we have progressed in terms of, I mean, apart from your pads and tampons and slightly more and more sophisticated pads and tampons, there is actually considerably less research on menstruation, on the problems that women face. Many women face menstruation is natural, but that doesn't mean it is without problem. Many women have major problems attending menstruation and reproductive and sexual health, none of which has received the same attention that other kinds of diseases and health conditions get. And I would, like Patralekha, attribute this to an overarching patriarchy. Um, but I would also like to point out that the sense of taboo has been so strong that even the women's movement, I mean, it is true that many, many, many years ago, at the launch of second wave of feminism, Germaine Greer wrote about this in her very famous book, Female Eunuch, that we need to confront the question of menstruation. But we never did. And it is only very recently that, at least in the South Asian context, we are seeing young feminists addressing the question of periods. And I think that's a very, very positive development, and all support and encouragement from my side to people who are engaged in these movements. Um, the second set of issues, so this is menstruation, but also childbirth. Childbirth superstitions have been extremely harmful, much more so than menstruation, and has been linked very strongly to high levels of child and maternal mortality. And a great deal of the change in health conditions in the case of South Asia, has targeted precisely this, has targeted child and maternal mortality. And one battle that health workers have struggled with is that of childbirth related superstition, of which one important aspect is the role of the traditional midwife. Now, I am not wholly in favor of demonizing the traditional midwife, because I see the ways in which caste, class, and gender shape the figure of the traditional midwife. But it is also good to recognize that that issue is, as much as I said menstruation is, this is also about changing technologies. And what we have to do in order to appreciate changing technologies as well as institutional modernity, which is the whole campaign for institutional delivery by women. uh, so, in that, what we have to separate is superstition and traditional practice. Not all traditional practice is necessarily superstitious. What is superstition? Superstition, I suppose, would be something that we consider irrational, something that is unreasoning, unthinking connections that we make. Um, but there is so much in our lives that are unreasoning and unthinking, not only superstitions. So we need to also not let ourselves be too carried away by this. And so we need to distinguish between harmful superstitions and not harmful superstitions, and be not necessarily be our condemnatory voice needs to be um, uh, uh, mitigated or uh, leavened by an appreciation of a great deal in our social life that is irrational and unthinking. So I would then come to the third set of issues that is in my framework, which is the question of um, modern superstitions. And to argue, in fact, that modernity and superstition are not necessarily at odds. You do get a lot of strange relationships between modernization and changes in or continuities in superstitions. Um, One issue, Patralekha has already spoken about some interesting examples of superstition. Um, what has always seemed to me very surprising, and I would have enjoyed listening to a scientist in today's panel, that we tend to think of science and superstition as being inimical, because science as a method of inquiry is the uh, highest test of reason in that sense. And one would imagine that people engaged in scientific inquiry would be so steeped in the method of science that they would find it difficult to be superstitious at the same time. But fortunately or unfortunately, human mind is capable of incredible paradoxes. So have observed that often scientists are very much prone to superstition. One image of the scientist that has always seemed to me very compelling, interesting, fascinating, is the scientist with more than 10, stone finger, finger rings with stones in there. So more than 10. So there has to be more than one in each finger. Many scientists wear these rings with stones, which are astrological stones meant to ward off this or that evil. Now, how these two sit together is to me an abiding mystery, and I would have loved to hear a scientist explain how and why these paradoxes sit together, how they reconcile these very different facets of their life. Having said that, um, I would also say that we must distinguish not only between traditional practice and superstition, but also religion and superstition. There may be associations between religion and superstition, but religion by itself, the core of religion, which is devotion, spirituality, is not superstition. So um, one must not demonize religion on the grounds of superstition. So at the same time, we must also recognize that there are many ways in which we are superstitious, and not all of it is necessarily. It is a very important aspect of everyday life of human beings, and especially people in hazardous occupations, people faced with all kinds of situations that they cannot control. Superstition is a way we deal with our environment, with our societies. So not all superstition is necessarily bad, but some superstitions, which, as Patralekha very rightly pointed out, which are part of power relations, which are used by powerful social groups against vulnerable members of society, those are the superstitions we have to address and attack. I stop there.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for sharing your views and insights. It was really interesting to listening to you. So now I would like to move on to our question answer session. First, I would like to come to Patralekha ma'am. Ma'am, my first question to you is that there are so many practices and customs based on preposterous, unfounded beliefs that society had come up with against women, like sati pratha, purification test, witch hunting, etc. Though you have already have talked a bit about that, would you like to add something more?
Yeah, I mean, I was a young journalist and I covered the famous Sati case of Roop Kanwar, Deorala. You probably don't remember, but Professor Sen, you may remember in Jaipur, and I'll share a story which there again there were the first initial stories Sati, but then when you do a deep dive over there, and I stayed back and sort of spoke, discovered that firstly sati is very rare now, right? It's criminalized and it's very rarely happens, but you find who does it happen to in the rare cases? It's young women. And there is again, I was told about the possible property angle and things like that. And what was interesting is I remember talking to actually a government official, and when I said, there was this whole worshipping of women who had, committed sati, and everybody said, "Oh, you've come as a journalist, but why don't you pick up the sindoor from here? This is very holy sindoor." I was married at that time, but I said, I personally don't believe in these things. I don't even wear sindoor, so I mean, this is not, this is not me. And when I was talking to this government official, he said, this is good. Don't say it's a rural belief. You go to your South Delhi where you stay and you talk to women over there. They believe in it. So I feel, that many of this, as Professor Sen said, it's multi-layered. There is, of course, the religious angle, but then what becomes a cultural practice and what seems preposterous is, I think, in a way of controlling women. I mean, for instance, why is it that you don't find sati, very elderly women who are absolutely, let's say, very poor, where their husbands die? Why is it that you don't? There's been recent times, there's been hardly any, no instances of that. So I think it's, in a way, it's kind of, it's, in a way, it's leveraged, these practices, the superstitious, which is there, and there are a large number of takers for it, and it's used against people who are not, would find fighting back difficult. So I think one has to see it really in the context of violence against women, discrimination against women, the harmful superstitions that you mentioned. And of course, as Professor Sen also said, like, and I also mentioned about, like lemon and chili, or those is okay. I mean, I may not believe in it, but I'm not going to lose my night's sleep if somebody does that. If it comforts you, if it makes you happy, do it. I mean, we all know before our exams, like, eggs and number 13 and all those things, we all, I mean, we've all gone, and even if we've not prayed for the rest of the year, we've gone and prayed, the night before mathematics exam or something like that. So I wouldn't, and that could be, you could put it down to many things, irrational beliefs, because if you don't have faith in God for 364 days of the year, what is so unique about this other day? So, the uniqueness is you've got an exam the next day. So I think it's okay, and I completely agree with Professor Sen that I think we mustn't, we mustn't be too judgmental in the case of what is, harmless. If it gives you somehow, if it makes you feel good, it's okay. But if it is actually, attacking, your body, your mental, I think I saw a question about, mental common mental problems, and stigmatizing of that in the name of superstition. I think those have real consequences. Not everybody. I mean, I mentioned this case of Anandi, a Gujarati NGO, who is trying to collectivize these women to speak up. Most women don't speak up because they feel that nobody will listen to them, and that they're alone. So I think we must, distinguish between superstitions which have direct harmful effect on your body, on your mind, and maybe your life itself, and the other ones which maybe some people need them to just navigate this, all the uncertainties in life.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for your points. My second question to you is that it is often believed that women are more superstitious than men. So, in your opinion, is it just a myth grew up from patriarchal mindset of the society, or does this actually have any psychological or practical aspect to it? Over to you, ma'am.
Is it to me or to Professor Sen?
Yes, ma'am. It's your question.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, honestly, I don't know. I mean, is it true? Is it, firstly, is it true that women? I don't know. I mean, this is like some people said. Is it anecdotal? Are women more superstitious? It is very possible. I mean, all these judges and scientists that we're talking about, and we all come from Bengal, right? And even in the heydays of the, the Marxist government, I remember many ministers, illustrious people used to go and consult astrologers, and these were not all women. So again, there is these paradoxes, and I'm not sure whether we can definitely say that women are more superstitious. But it is possible, and again, firstly, with the caveat that I don't know whether women are indeed more superstitious, but it is very possible that a large number of women are still home, and family is their main sphere, and most of these superstitions are operationalized in the domain of home, and they also talk about these things to other women. It is possible that that comes across as women are more superstitious, where but whether that is indeed so, because as we know that any number of even very illustrious people, even in people in positions of power, the whole, going to gurus, going to astrologers, listening to things, this is going beyond the strictly speaking rational side of our lives, right? So why do they do that? Why do even very powerful men, women, and even in our government right now, there have been cases of, I'm talking about the union government, I don't know about the state governments. I don't think, we've seen ministers, actual ministers, sort of doing this. So yeah, I think it's women who talk about it and people who are at their homes. I think if home is your main site, and a very large number of women are still in that area, it is possible that it's operationalized and they're probably more vocal about it. And maybe it's men journalists who talk to them, or you start off with the assumption that women are more superstitious, and then you go looking for women and you find some superstitious women, and then that becomes a QED. So I personally, I'm not sure whether this is indeed true. And but women are definitely, what is indeed true, that I think women are disproportionately affected, the harmful effects. And most of the cases that we've talked about today, whether it's childbirth, whether it's menstruation, or whether it's witch hunting, which actually is right through the entire, covers the entire life cycle, childhood, adolescence, and adult, definitely this, I mean, there are also cases of human sacrifices and all that, and even Magellan, but I think the disproportionate impact is definitely on women. So superstition affects women, I think. There again, I don't know whether there's been a comprehensive study, but my feeling, my sense is that women are more disproportionately affected in in many of these you know these, by these superstitions, the harmful superstitions, that is.
Yes, ma'am.
Moumita, can I add a word to what Patralekha has said?
Sure, ma'am, please.
So I would actually say that the perception, I don't think women are more superstitious than men. I mean, you can see quite spectacular examples of superstition in men. And I don't think it is gendered in that sense. But I do think that superstition is most ubiquitous in our everyday life. It structures our everyday life. And in that kind of superstition, women are possibly the repositories of superstition, and they have socially been made the repositories of superstition. So I'm thinking about Konar Bochon, which we Bengalis know. I don't know how it translates into other regions of India. But this what whether you can eat begun on Thursday or not, whether you can, what you can do for this day of the week and that day of the week, these have been made the world of women, and you learn about it down the female line. These are like these are female wisdom. Your grandmother teaches you, this is what you need to do, this is what you don't eat uh, fruits in the evening, you don't cut your nail on such and such day of the week. These structuring principles of everyday life have very much been made into a female world, and that is also part of how patriarchy operates, I
Yes.
would say.
Okay, ma'am.
If I could, I've when I first came to Delhi, I used to notice this, and where I live, South Delhi, and my neighborhood is would be considered probably quite posh. You go to a parlor. I didn't realize it's Tuesdays they don't cut nails, Thursdays they don't cut hair. I used to wonder Saturday, and you ask somebody, why is it that you don't do these things? They don't know. Most of the, like you said, repository. But if you ask a young girl working over there, the staff also takes leave on these days. And why do the staff take leave? Because customers are very few. And why do the customers are very few? Because Tuesdays is inauspicious, Thursdays are, that's 3 days in a week. You can't do many things, on which your bread and butter or beauty parlors. And you ask one of these people, why is it that you can't do it? They say, हमें पता नहीं, my mother said this. So I think this is what you call the internal story, yeah, maybe the women's story, the women, from women to women. So that could be one reason, you know why this perception is gained that women are more superstitious. But yeah, I mean, I don't think people know. Like in Delhi, I've asked many girls, so tell me the reason why in Thursdays, what will happen if you cut nails on Thursdays, or Saturdays if you cut hair? They say, I don't know. But my mother has told me this. So I don't do it also. So this is how things pass on. And also they don't think this is something which you must in, I think, at least in most Indian family, there isn't a huge culture of questioning and critiquing anyway, not just about nails and cutting hair, but about anything. So I don't think, I don't think many young women see that this is something which you start a argument with your mother or whatever. The fact that you're going out and working is, your battles. You choose your battles. Don't start a fire at home about questioning this. So I think it's an interesting narrative.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much for your valuable insights. So now I would like to ask Dr. Samita. Ma'am, as you have already spoke about taboos, during menstruation or pregnancy, there are so many restrictions women has to face, especially during pregnancy, which is one of the most difficult periods in a woman's life. But even at that time, women have to face more hardships due to these superstitions, like they cannot attend wedding or cannot cut their hairs, or various restrictions during eclipse. So, what do you think? How badly this can hit a woman's psychology?
Well, I would like to say two things. Actually, pregnancies, there are many superstitions and there are things you can't do. But not attending weddings or not cutting your hair are not very harmful things. So I would let those things go. I would instead say that pregnancy in the South Asian context, certainly the culture I know, which is Bengal, pregnancy is probably the only time in your life where your people pay some attention to you in a positive way. You are looked after a little bit. And that is not because of you, but because it is in the family's interest for the child that is not born, especially if it is a son, that you are looked after. So it is in the balance of things, I would say, that it is surprising that pregnancy and childbirth superstitions are so much at odds. That surprises me because I understand the mentality of care that goes into pregnancy. What I don't understand is a culture that is so pronatalist. Why childbirth is attended with so much negative um, superstition, and what a horrible effect that has had on our society in terms of child mortality, maternal mortality, and all that. So my focus would be much more on childbirth superstitions than on pregnancy related superstitions. And some of our childbirth related superstitions are truly demonic. it's and But the good thing perhaps is that is one area in which great strides and leaps have been made. Childbirth conditions have improved dramatically across the country, at all levels of society, which we can see directly in our child and maternal mortality rates. More needs to be done, no doubt, but I think as a society, we are beginning to recognize that superstition in that area is not helpful.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Thank you for sharing your insights. So, my next question to you is that there are certain practices that women are made to follow in the belief that it will be good for the health of their husbands and children, like Karwa Chauth and Sasti Puja, when women fast the whole day and pray. But even if given a choice, women seldom choose not to follow these as they don't want to take chances regarding the welfare of their husbands and children. So, do you think there is also an element of emotional and psychological exploitation in such superstitious beliefs and practices?
Absolutely, I would completely agree with that. And I would also point out that that is the sacrificial, gendered, gendering of sacrifice that is deeply ingrained in our culture. So women do many things in for men in many kinship relations, for sons, for so Bhaipota for brothers, Shoshti Pujo for sons, Karwa Chauth for husbands. A variety of these things are there which women do for the good of their men kin. There is no custom I am aware of in the reverse. I don't know of any festival or any occasion when men do something for the good of their women, which tells you very clearly that this is only a one way relationship. There is no reciprocity in these relationships. And that is the hard rock of Indian patriarchy. Women are not important. Women are there to service men, to labor for men in their various capacities. And that is how society is imagined. And of course, it is terrible. And it's not only emotional exploitation, it is often very direct exploitation of both, you know, of labor and other things, sexuality and labor. Um, but what uh, interests me even more is because of that emotional element, because you're doing it for someone you love, it is so difficult to change. Because every time you want to change it, then it appears as though you are denying that emotional connect. You're taking away something that is meant for somebody's welfare, somebody you love their welfare. So, in fact, it is the Karwa Chauth. How do you address Karwa Chauth? By saying, okay, men will also do it for you, not by saying that you don't do it. Because to say don't do it means as though you are wishing harm. You are you are withdrawing a good wish. And the opposite side of that is wishing harm. So, in a sense, it is a very tricky terrain. How do you address these whatever you call them, superstitions, festivals around superstitions? They are so ingrained in our psyches that modernity takes the form of exporting Karwa Chauth to all parts of India, not addressing Karwa Chauth or making it gender neutral. It's a peculiar trajectory of modernization. It really, I find it it's a struggle for me to even understand this process.
And
Okay.
if
Yes,
I could
ma'am.
just, you know, the other interesting thing I find about Karwa Chauth specifically, and I don't observe it, and I don't observe any ritual actually, is that, if I go back, I came to Delhi in the early 1980s. Yeah, I'll talk about Delhi, North India. Of course, Karwa Chauth was it was observed by a large, but I think what has also happened over the last few decades is also a certain merchandising, the commercialization. So, and I think this has become a very major issue. So it's actually even going beyond superstition or non-superstition. It's like the way, Mother's Day, Father's Day, Valentine's Day, Karwa Chauth is another. And you have Karwa Chauth thalis, you have like Navaratri thalis. So there's a certain merchandising which is people, they get clothes, and then they, like you said, the husband sometimes fast, they go out for dinner in the evening. So, and if I look back, my generation of women, who self, I think was much less before. And I find the younger women, I mean, this is the paradox which Professor Sen, I think you, alluded to, because again, then you get down to what is modernity. It's also the other political questions which we are wrestling with in India. Who is an Indian? What is Indian culture? What is being patriotic? Lots of things are intersecting over here. So I would say 25, 30, 40 years ago, Karwa Chauth was there, but it was a home thing. You did it at home. It wasn't a public, it wasn't a sort of open religiosity, or very flamboyantly celebrating these things. It becomes, there's a whole industry around it. Let's face it, there is a whole industry around it. And I wouldn't say it's not just with Karwa Chauth, with lots of things, Valentine's Day, Mother's Day, Father's Day, this day, that day. So you can see the commercial angle, clothes, jewelry, going out for dinner, everything is about money, commercial thing. And that is, I would imagine, is also a big draw, because people like to have fun, people like to go out. So a lot of people may be doing it not because necessarily they even believe in the superstition, but because it's a kind of a pure thing. It's decking up. But what I wanted to point out is that among younger women who otherwise would call themselves, other markers of, again, quote unquote modernity, in some of the external markers like clothes and, working, they also do this. So I think there are, I think we are, as a society in transition. I think we are wrestling with many. I mean, you can't typically say that who is the kind of person who who does Karwa Chauth, because if you see this person other days, maybe she's wearing a crop top, maybe she's very, Western in other, or what would be seen as Western in many ways. So again, I don't know how you, but what is going on inside the mind, I think everything has become, because of this merchandising angle, everything is, out in the public. I wouldn't be surprised if people are Instagramming every moment of their Karma Chauth, a whole reel. So it's not what you do out of belief or under pressure, but what you want people to think you are doing. So it's like clearly living in a fishbowl, I think, where there is an element of oversharing of every aspect of your life, including your innermost beliefs, your fears, your insecurities. This is, I find, quite common among the younger people. And again, are they modern? Are they not modern? They have many, many markers of modernity, but they also have this. And I think, I don't know in other countries, but this is certainly true in South Asia and in India, where, I live.
Thank you, ma'am. Thanks to both of you for sharing your views. So, as both of you have talked a lot about menstruation, I would like to ask that during menstruation, a woman is supposed to be impure, but the menstruation of goddess Kali is celebrated at Tarapit temple. So, how the dichotomous do you think this treatment of a goddess and a human being, especially when we have so many female goddess in our religion? I would first like to hear from Patralekha ma'am.
This is a tough one. I actually don't find it very paradoxical, because I think the thing about India is that we have a problem treating women as equals. We treat them as devis or dasis. So I think in a way it's a kind of, this business of worshipping a woman is also sidestepping or not dealing with the question of a woman as a flesh and blood, equal, right? So the moment you put her in this some kind of a pedestal, you in a way taken away her agency, whether it's sexuality, whether it's her mind, she's up there. I personally have an issue with this being worshipped. You find a lot of traditional people saying we worship women, and therefore we can't possibly be bad to women. And I think it's actually not a paradox, because it is again this Devi Dasi issue, that the problem they have is treating women as equals, acknowledging that I mean, why is it that men don't say we want to be worshipped as David? They want to be, the here and now, the game of power, sexuality, everything, the everyday. I think you take a woman out and put her somewhere in the pedestal, like Kumari Puja, I think is also another thing. Is it a good custom? Is it a bad custom? Where does that mean, that a woman is treated well? I think this business of deifying a woman, in a way, you're also, what should I say, freezing her in a specific frame, a then she doesn't have any, leverage. She can't move. She's already up there as a pedestal. She has to be like a statue, right? So I personally would have a problem, with being deified. And I see this business of, I've seen this in this particular argument coming, that we have I'm not talking about Bengal's thing of female goddesses, but that we worship women, and therefore we can't possibly be bad to women. I don't think so. I mean, worship, why do you always, why don't other culture, I mean, you look at other countries where the gender index and all are very well, do they talk in terms of worshipping women? They don't. So why is it that they don't talk in terms of worshipping women? Because, women, I don't think necessarily want to be worshipped. I mean, firstly, you have to ask women whether they want to be worshipped, and why they would prefer, I think, to be just treated as an equal in everyday life. So, that's my take.
Okay. Samita ma'am, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I would absolutely endorse what Patralekha has said and say that when you say you're worshipping women, you're not actually worshipping women. You're worshipping a deity in the image of a woman. The actual women, they never worship. Forget it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that was in fact the very famous film by Satyajit Ray called Devi. What happens when you actually start worshipping a real woman? It's the paradox of that was very beautifully explored in that film. But yeah, I mean that I don't see it as a paradox at all. I would say that menstruation is one aspect of women's sexuality and reproductive power, which in fact is marks out the difference between men and women, and it is in a sense seen as core to female power because it is because in a pronatalist society women's power of reproduction is a power, right? And it is because women have this power that they need to be controlled, and that it is that power is what men want to harness. They don't want women to have that power and to be able to use it. So you harness women into sexuality in marriage, in terms of their sexuality and reproduction, and marriage is the instrument through which you control women. So that's not a paradox. That is actually how the relationship of power works out. It is the core of our patriarchy.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Thanks to both of you. My last question is, what strategies, according to you, should we take to reduce the gender-biased myths and superstitions which affect women awfully? I would first like to hear from Samita, ma'am.
What policies we can take to control superstition? I don't think there is any one policy by which we can do this. My sense of it, I'm a unabashed modernist. I don't, I, whereas I do appreciate the power of traditional practices, I also appreciate the power of religion. I don't necessarily see that, and I do also understand that you can't turn whole societies, every individual in a society into completely like perfect rational beings. But nevertheless, I think the value of reason is an important one. and the importance of inculcating scientific spirit and thinking, and power of logic and reason is to me important, and that can happen. No policy can actually do that. We must have much more effective education along with um, state policies which combat harmful areas of superstition. So, like witch hunting does need to be addressed through both laws and administration, enforcement of laws. We do need to address things like superstitions affecting widows, childbirth, in some cases, menstruation. These are harmful superstitions which harm people's health and mental health and physical health. And these need to be addressed through policies, specifically targeted policies. But otherwise, generally, to, you know, reduce tendency towards superstition is something that can only come with education, in my view.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Patralekha, ma'am, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I mean, I think what Professor Sen said is, totally spot on. I would just add that, as I gave the example of this, in Gujarat, we have to break the silence. I think this is very important. The very fact, I think, Professor said, you mentioned about menstruation. I think when we were growing up, when we were in college, it wasn't somehow, even those of us who call feminists, it wasn't the glamorous enough feminist subject, so I think the very fact that we are now talking about the, such as during this panel discussion and also outside, the fact that it is okay to speak about menstruation. I see, entire webinars, scholarly discourse, even on social media. The fact that you're talking about, and even men are engaging, it's still a wafer thin minority. I mean, we mustn't think that, whole India is talking about it. So I think breaking the silence is extremely important. And I think it's also the first stop, as I said, in this case of Gujarat and which branding, just laws. You need the laws, but I think women, especially since it's the vulnerable who are targeted the most, I think it's extremely important to give the woman that she's not alone, and that will happen if you can discuss, if you feel there's a support network, formal or informal, such as, like, in this discussion we are having, that you have a problem, you faced this before, menstruation or childbirth, that you can actually go out and talk about it. And that's, I think, this is the first step. And you can have a community of people who are discussing it. Yes, it may not be the whole world, it isn't the whole world, and but the fact that you're not completely alone. So I really think that breaking the silence is the very, very first step, because you can keep making laws. How do you, when you talked about childbirth, I mean, since I write a lot on health, I know this. One of the very common taboos, and actually this is there even among educated women, is, what is it called? Colostrum. The first few drops of breast milk. Superstition that it's bad, and it's actually the best thing, and they throw it away. And I remember doing a project for UNICEF, where I saw this middle class educated woman said she had never heard of it, because all her family elders had told her this is very bad. It's only when a ASHA worker, health worker, came and said that this is extremely important for the newborn child, please don't throw it away. So I think, and in a non-threatening way. And one of the things they did when you're trying to break taboos is, don't I really think that you can't be confrontational over here. I think Professor Sen also mentioned this, that be too normative, because people have their positions. So one of the things they did over there, because it's the mother-in-law who was telling her, don't do this, don't do that. So when they had these discussions, they actually involved the mother-in-law. And there were not just one mother-in-law, several mothers-in-law. So you don't feel so. People still, not everybody will still change their behavior or their ideas, but I think when you feel that, okay, several people think like this, and if I say something, I'm not going to stick out. I think that's important, and I think it's very important how you word. The words matter. I mean, if it comes across as, I'm better than you, and your beliefs are rubbish, if it's that made very obvious, I think you're going to get very hardline positions. So in this manner of behavior change, deeply entrenched beliefs, I think we have to be a little bit careful about how we phrase it. What is our end goal? To get people to change their behavior, to recognize what is harmful. Nobody would want to harm their babies, but why do they follow these customs? So, like I said, get the family elders involved, break the silence, make the woman feel that she's not the only one. That if there's a serious problem, she can go. It isn't easy, and it is definitely going to be tougher in some parts of the country compared to others. We know that from the sheer health indicators. The northern India, many states, some of the attitudes, again, a function of literacy, backwardness, many things, women isolated. So I mean, yeah, I would really uh, I would really put a lot of emphasis on breaking the silence.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much, both of you, for sharing your valuable insights. So, with this, we bring the session to an end. It is very much unfortunate that we couldn't have Dr. Keerthi Bollineni in this conversation due as she has some emergencies. So, thank you, both of you, for being here with us and giving us your time. It was indeed a very enriching and interesting session, and we got to know a lot from your perspectives and opinions on gender biased superstitions. Once again, thank you very much. Drawing the session to a close here. Good night.
Thank you so much. Lovely meeting you.